Hello, welcome to Objects Tell Stories, special event with Elizabeth Garner and Dr. Tim Campbell Green. We were scheduled to do this back in April in a venue here in Macclesfield, but for obvious reasons that didn't happen. However, thanks to the magic of the online world, we've now got more of you here than we would have had in person. So that's one good thing to come out of this. The other is to have the joy and pleasure of being able to introduce you to two people who I know are going to fascinate and beguile this afternoon. Elizabeth Garner is the author of two novels, Night Dancing and The Ingenious Edgar Jones, both of which were influenced by the traditional folktale narratives and motifs in which she'd been immersed since her childhood. She recently successfully crowdfunded for her first collection of rewritten stories, Lost and Found, which will be published next year, and which, from the extracts that we've read, promises to be an exquisite and enthralling read. There's actually a link to the crowdfunding with more details about the book on this YouTube page. You'll find it in the details. Elizabeth is a trustee of the Blackden Trust, which is an educational charity established by her parents at the family home in Cheshire, which is a treasure trove of history and creativity and gives rise to this event this afternoon. Proceeds from this evening's event will go to the Blackden Trust, so please do use the trust link on the YouTube page to make a donation. I'd like to now also introduce Dr. Tim Campbell Green. Tim has more than 25 years of archaeological experience in England and Crete and is currently involved with the Blackden Trust. As he says, trying to make sense of 10,000 years of human occupation on the site, from the Mesolithic to the Victorian periods. He also works as part of the school's outreach programme that the Trust undertakes. Tim's current research interests lie in the use of pottery and in the magical protection of houses. In his hometown of Glossop, down the road in the High Peak, Tim runs a local history archaeological blog, the Glossop Cabinet of Curiosities, and can be found on Twitter at Robert Hamnet, where he'll be tweeting about local archaeology, magic and folklore. Towards the end of our time here today, you'll have a chance to pose your questions to Liz and Tim. You can post them in the chat function. You'll find it on the right-hand side of your screen, or if you're on a mobile device, you'll find them at the bottom. And we'll try and get through as many as we can. We'd like you to, if you can stick with the theme of tonight's discussion, that would be wonderful. So with no further ado, really, it's just really wonderful to have you both here. Thank you very much. And I'm going to hand over now for what promises to be a really fascinating conversation and evening. So thank you.
Thank you, Dana.
Thank you. Are you there? Is this going to work? Here we go.
Here we go.
Excellent.
So this is us in situ, and we are going to go from the inside of this place to the outside, which is where our stories together start. So here we go. Now, this story, or what we are unpacking, actually started, it's really lovely timing, 50 years ago. My parents, Alan and Griselda Garner, came across this house, which was going to be demolished. And we all know about the idea of moving house, but this is a house that actually moved. So it was 20 miles away from where it now stands in Cheshire. It was in Staffordshire, in a place called Rhine Hill. And there's a lovely folktale motif about the fact that things on the outside are rarely what they seem on the inside. And it's no more true than with this place, the Old Medicine House. So this is the inside of the timber frame that was hidden by the brick face. And this is it when it was being deconstructed. And this was in the 1970s. It could have been done by with a crane, but my parents and the workmen who were involved decided to take it down and put it up again using the mechanisms that would have been used at the time. So it's quite incredible, the ladders and the block and the tackle.
And I have to say the lack of any health and safety.
Yes, those were the days, eh, Tim?
Yeah.
And we can see it in situ again here. And I love the sign here, road works ahead. I was saying to Tim when we were looking at this, for me, this is the first indication of the concept of the long roads that stories travel on. And so it was deconstructed, and here it is being put up in the garden in Cheshire. So Tim, do you want to talk a little bit about that and about what we can see there?
Yeah, I mean, it's quite a fascinating little slice of the history of the house. It's actually being constructed using very traditional techniques. It currently stands on a wonderful sandstone skirt around the bottom, the foundations. But as you can see here, the entire timber frame is on trestles, which again, as I say, is a very traditional way of doing it. And it's simply done because when you build a normal house, you build it brick by brick from the ground up. Whereas a timber framed house is very much put together like a piece of macana. And then you fill in the gaps in between with wattle and daub and plaster. So if you were to do that from the ground up, the bits wouldn't fit. Wood is very organic, and it's difficult to get everything exactly lined up exactly where you would need it to be. Much easier to build it on the trestles and then physically drop it onto the foundations. It just makes life easier when you're building these things. But I'm amazed that this method was chosen rather than, as you say, craning it in place and bonkers.
Yeah, and another wonderful thing about it is, as you can see from those initial pictures, a lot of the wood was rotted away, but the main supporting beams that run through the middle of the house, they were complete, and so they could work out exactly where the new wood needed to be placed because the holes were there. And I remember working with the archaeologist Francis Pryor, and he said when I was editing some of his fiction, and he said, yes, the fascinating thing is about, I can't talk Francis without doing Francis, anyone who's met him will understand this, is the one thing you can't hide in this world is a hole. And I just thought that was a wonderful truth of archaeology and a little kind of folk riddle in itself. But I am getting distracted and we've only been going 5 minutes. So this was it in construction, and this is how it looks now. And part of the treasure of the house is not just this wonderful building itself, but what was revealed through that process of deconstruction and reconstruction. And I'm going to hand over to Tim on that.
Thank you. I think, during the deconstruction, one of the workmen found a bundle, and I think your mum and dad both gave strict instructions if anything was found within the house to give a shout, because you find interesting things in houses. There's very much you can do an archaeology of the inside of a house. But what they found was what's known as a cache, or as they are more commonly known, increasingly known as spiritual middens.
And we can have a look at that, can't we, Tim? Of
we
actually
can.
What that looks like on the page.
Yes, we can. Have we got a? There we go. This is the contents of that cache. This is. Excuse the spelling mistakes. I just realised there are spelling mistakes on this. This is my document, just to tell us what was in there. And there's all sorts of interesting things in there. So you've got bits of pottery, you've wood, bone, paper, cloth, leather, stone bits. The concept of a cache is interesting, very interesting, to be fair. It seems that in the past, people took what appears to be random objects. Seemingly random is the important word there. They are not random by any means. Random objects, wrapped them up occasionally and hid them, deposited them deliberately within the fabric of the house. By which I mean under the floor, in the walls, in very inaccessible places, and particularly around areas that you would perhaps view as weak somehow. So doorways and windows, and very particularly chimneys, hearths. The simple reason being that you can't close up a chimney. It's always open. Similarly with doors, no matter how well you seal a door, there's always a draft that comes through, especially in a house that is 400 years old. So you've got to imagine that where these drafts come, people at that time are very strongly believe in the power of evil working on a daily level, coming into your house and doing all sorts of damage to your family, your household, your property, your livelihood. And it seems, and this is a very much a developing field of investigation, it seems that these caches were deposited deliberately to counteract this malign influence.
And we're going to be digging into exactly how they do that as we go on, aren't we, Tim? We've got some lovely, lovely treasures to share with you. So what we're starting with here is this idea that through the treasures of the Blackden Trust, Tim and I have been able to have these conversations about how objects and motifs in folk tales and folklore seem to be reflected in these finds, and how certainly part of the philosophy and the practice of the Blackden Trust is this relationship between the creativity and the rootedness in place, and how, if you look closely enough, there are stories everywhere. And so we are inviting you now to come with a walk with us on the long roads of places that are both familiar and unfamiliar. And as any folk tale teller will tell you, most interesting encounters happen in a place that is familiar to all of us. And that's the concept of the crossroads. And I asked Tim to pick his favourite crossroads, and here it is.
It's not often you get asked that, really, is it? What's your favourite crossroads?
Oh, come on, I've asked you loads of times.
Yeah, that's true, actually, yeah. Okay, yeah, so this is actually, it's just down the road. I can actually see this from my bedroom window, this crossroads. And this is a place called Row Cross. It's between Manchester and Glossop, and by extension Sheffield and Barnsley and that side of the Pennines. And it's actually the meeting of 7 roads. Right, so I should explain that the road that goes northwest, southeast, so broadly top left to bottom right, that wouldn't have been there before 1800. That's a turnpike road that was literally blasted through this. It's a big hilly area. But you can see the 7 roads, and they all come together, and there's local traffic, but there's obviously this through traffic that goes between the 2 big cities and the big areas. And they come together at this one point in the middle of that circle. That area there is called Gallows Clough, and the name first comes up in the medieval period, when they didn't name things romantically. They named them for what was there. Gallows Clough is literally the clough or small valley where the gallows stood, and by extension there would have been a gibbet there as well, where the poor victim would have been tarred and left swinging, so to speak. So you've got 7 roads coming through there. No matter which way you go, you have to pass through this crossroads, and crossroads are a great example of what we would call a liminal space. That is, they're neither one thing nor the other. They occupy an uneasy place in between. You pass through a crossroads, but you don't really go there for any reason. You go from place to place. And for that reason, crossroads are usually, they attract folklore, but traditionally they're the place that you bury the outcast. So you would bury witches, executioners, execution victims, people who were executed. People who committed suicide, people who are deemed to be different from society, for 2 reasons. Firstly, it's unconsecrated ground, drawing on a belief system where actually the afterlife, your punishment would be continued. You wouldn't go to heaven. You would be condemned to eternal damnation, effectively. But also, crossroads are confusing. The idea behind this is commonly thought to be that if you bury someone there, their ghost cannot come back and find you. They will get lost. They will not know which way to go.
Shall we take a look at it now?
Yes, I think
we look at it in 3 dimensions.
This is the road as it is now. There's a new housing development there, and there's a pub just across the way. You almost, do we tell people that there are bodies buried there? Because they would bury the execution victims underneath the gibbet. So, yeah, I'm currently standing. I took the photograph a couple of years ago, but it's the Roman road that goes between Melandra Roman forts and into Castleshaw Roman forts in Saddleworth. So it's important, and it's been important for a long time.
Fascinating. And that idea that, you know, what is on the surface a little bit odd, but quite every day, that things happen there. So shall we take a first journey to a crossroads in a folk tale?
Yes, let's.
So
enjoying this.
Good, me too. So one of the things that I was really interested in when developing this collection was the idea of absolutely being true to the stories, but thinking about character. And we'll unpack this a little bit more later on. And I've always loved the story of Trickster Jack, but I found that, you know, the motif, his character. But I thought, I bet he didn't start out like that. What made Jack have the values that he has and the behaviour that he has? And so I've started the collection fairly early on with Jack's first story, which is when he goes out in search of adventure. And he's been travelling on the long roads quite a while, and he has a question that no one can answer. Until one day he came to a crossroads with a signpost set in the centre, cutting up the clouds like a compass. Leaning against it was a tall, thin gentleman, dressed in a long, dark coat. He had a fiddle tucked under his arm and a black hat upon his head that put Jack in mind of the stovepipe in his old mother's kitchen. "Kind sir," Jack said, "may I trouble you with a question?" "Certainly," said the gentleman. "Is it a great question or a lesser one?" Jack thought of all the folk that he'd met upon his travels, and of how not one of them had been able to offer him an answer. "I suppose it must be a great question," said Jack. "The rest of my life depends upon it." "Then I would be happy to assist you," said the gentleman. "All I ask in return for a true answer is that you pay me back in kind. 9 lesser questions of my own, set against the singular greatness of yours." They shook upon the agreement. The gentleman's hand was smooth to the touch, and the nails were long and filed to a point. "Then tell me true," said Jack, "where is the place that north, south, east, and west meet?" The gentleman took the bow of his fiddle and drew a perfect circle in the dirt around where Jack stood. "Simple, my friend, where else but beneath your own feet?" Jack laughed, and then he stopped. He was stuck fast, frozen inside that circle. Then he understood the nature of the fate that he had met, and his blood ran cold. The gentleman turned and whispered in Jack's ear, "Now as you did swear to me, answer my questions 3 times 3. If you cannot tell true these 9, then your very soul be mine." Then he tucked his fiddle beneath his chin, struck up a tune and sang. "What is taller than the tree, and what is deeper than the sea? What is sharper than the thorn, and what is louder than the horn? What is greener than the grass, and what is smoother than the glass? What is longer than the winding way, and what is colder than earth's clay? And what is there seen, told, or heard, more dreadful than the witch's words?" Watch out for those crossroads, folks.
Well, I mean, if you go to sell your soul, you go to the crossroads, don't you?
Yes, exactly. Don't give away the ending, Tim.
Sorry, yeah.
So that part of what really I've enjoyed about this rewriting process is always going back to source, and this idea that the everyday holds meaning, and this idea that characters were formed by this practical investigation of the world. And so I'll pull up now one of the copies of the source text. This is from the Bodleian Archive. I apologise, it's a little bit blurry. This is a version from the mid-1600s, and it's called "A Noble Riddle Wisely Expounded." And the framing of it is questions that a knight sets to test the virtue of a lady. And some of the phrasing of those questions are slightly different than what I did in the rewrite, but the heart of them is absolutely the same. But in some folklore versions, sometimes the woman does meet the devil. And what's really interesting in the chorus to this, which I don't think you can see there, is that after every question, there is the phrase, lay the bent to the bonny broom. And there are theories about this, that this is types of flower, a metaphor for maidenhood and other such things. But there's also a theory that this links to an old folklore custom, that one way of keeping out evil was laying a piece of reedy bent grass across the broom grass of the broomstick. And I'm going to hand over to Tim now.
Yes. Well, we found the piece of folklore that so it's very much a northern thing of laying crossed brooms, as in witches' brooms, but to sweep up with across a threshold. The idea being that normal people can come into the house over that, they step over it, no problem, but a witch will pass by, will make an excuse and carry on going. So again, you know, the mundane can actually do a great deal, which I think this is very much a theme of this evening, isn't it? And it's the mundane objects that you find in great quantity in caches, including brushes, actually, thinking about it. You know, so, that is, sorry.
No, you go, Tim.
All right. Yeah, I mean, at its very basis, a cache is quite literally filled with rubbish. For example, the shoes that we find generally are worn beyond repair, and shoes would be repaired time and again, because you just do. That's what you do with a shoe, because they're quite expensive. Whereas now they wear out, we just throw them and get a new one. So these shoes are at the end of their use life. They're disposed of in a cache. Well, I should say that, very importantly, only one shoe is generally included in the cache.
Oh, I think it's time for us to look at all of that a little bit more closely. So we've got
yes.
We have the thresholds of the outside world, the crossroads, but also we have thresholds and crossroads indoors, and no more so than at Blackden.
Yeah.
So this is the central chimney at Blackden, where you can see what seem to be walls. This is actually the mouth of a hanging chimney that runs the whole height of the house. It's the heart and hearth of the house. And I'm going to hand over to Tim now to show you, to look a little closer.
Yes, indeed, look a little closer. Okay, so what we have here is, well, it's a protective mark, an apotropaic mark, which is an absolutely wonderful word, which means to turn away. It's surprisingly difficult to say, but there you go. It's to turn away, in this case, turn away evil. And these are found increasingly commonly in buildings of this period and indeed later. What's interesting is you have I should perhaps say roughly what they are. They're designed, best guess using the evidence we have, to turn away evil, to stop witchcraft, to stop bad things happening. And we find them in very similar places to the caches, around chimneys in particular, but doors and windows, but also potentially protecting beams, the big important beams that hold the house up. They're sometimes known as witch marks, which is a bit reductive. It's a bit dismissive. There's a lot more going on than just protecting against witches here. They're found up and down the country in a range of time periods, and a surprising range of time periods, from mid-1600s to into 1900 and possibly later. The marks have a very limited repertoire. There's maybe 15 different types with subtypes within it, but broadly speaking. And as I say, they're up and down the country. So there's something going on. The people are doing things in order to protect. The origin of the marks, and this is where it gets interesting. I find this particularly fascinating. My current working hypothesis is that the marks have that origin in religious marks, religious images. The classic of these witch marks, of these apotropaic marks, is the interlocking V's.
That we can see really clearly here, can't we?
Yeah. You basically you have a V and another V, and they're joined together to make what looks like a W. The interlocking V's is two V's, which stands for the Virgin of Virgins, referring to Mary. And it's the interlocking V's was a symbol that was used in a number of ecclesiastical buildings, including at Walsingham, the big Marian shrine there, which by the late Middle Ages was England's foremost shrine, had overtaken Thomas à Becket's shrine in Canterbury as a place that people will go on pilgrimage. So during the Middle Ages, you expect these signs to be carved in, but what happens, obviously, in the 1530s and 1540s and onwards with the Reformation, you're no longer allowed to appeal to Mary or to the saints, and it's very much removed from the religion. And yet we see these marks continuing, as I say, into 1900. Almost as if it's the mark itself is important. The meaning behind it may change, but it's the mark that has become powerful. I find this particularly interesting. As I say, it's very similar to the idea behind the caches. You're turning away evil, you're protecting. We also find burn marks, which I know that at Toad Hall, or at the Old Medicine House, there are a number of burn marks, tapered marks, which, you know, to the first glance, they just look like a little burn mark on the wood. But actually, experiment has shown that these things can only have happened by continual application of a flame, letting it cool, picking away at the burnt bit, and then you put the flame back. It takes time to do this. These are very deliberate marks. This is not just some child messing about.
It's a ritual that it creates these marks. It's not a one accident. No,
absolutely not. It is not. It's not somebody bored with a knife or with a match. You know, it's something a bit more going on there. Again, best guess behind the burn marks, for example, is the idea that either lightning doesn't strike twice. So if you've already burnt the wood of your house, it's not going to burn again. Or perhaps, the idea is that, you know, if a witch casts a spell, the spell won't work because it can already see that it's been burnt. So it assumes that it can do no more damage. But again, these are best guesses. Yeah. Part of the spooky part of this, and I find it quite disturbing, is the fact that there is no written record of any of this. Nobody's talking about it.
Maybe that's that. I mean, this is the storyteller ahead of me, but perhaps those written records and those echoes were held in the oral tradition and were in the folk tales, because that's a wonderful storyteller. Hugh Lupton once said to me, "The best place to hide a secret is in a story." I think that's a lovely thing. Do you want to show also how they were carried, how these marks were carried?
Yeah, absolutely. We have here, this is a medieval trade token, which are used in place of money generally. But again, I have a suspicion that they're also used as touch pieces for protection. This is a trade token. You can clearly see there are two V's there. It isn't a W, a stylized W. There was one V over another V there. And of course, these things are mass produced, so it would have to have a mold into which the lead would be poured. You also find them on medieval pilgrimage ampulla, particularly these symbols. And actually, I think, again, they're all drawing on broadly the same iconography, which you find within the church, within religion. So I find this very interesting, this interplay.
And the fact that the thought that these tokens were something that were carried as people travelled.
Yeah.
And it just very briefly, just to put this in a kind of wider literary context, we've got a page here from James I's Demonology, which you know we could pick up, but essentially it shows how this belief was really part of the life lived, and how it was important that it was debated. And if you think about the Demonology was published 1597, Macbeth 1623, so this is very much of the time. And the fact, I find it fascinating that these stories and these beliefs also needed to be told and acted out and turned into a narrative that could be seen in 3 dimensions, if that makes sense. It just, for me, this shows how much it was part of the culture.
Well, this is it. You know, we talk about I don't know, good luck, bad luck. We salute magpies and don't walk under ladders. But for them, this is a real belief. This is, you know, the witch and evil spirits will daily be trying to do damage to you and your life.
And we have
it's a real belief
to show that, don't we, as well, that you can tell us about.
There we go. So yeah, I mean, it's a woodcut of the 17th century, and you clearly see a witch on a broomstick by the chimney. But if you look closely, there is a witch coming down the chimney, because the chimney's open and it's not protected by a mark or a cache or something similar. This is how evil will enter your house and will play merry hell, no pun intended, with your livelihood and everything in it. The person at the door, again, you know, they're trying to get in. Are
they though?
Well,
I think that's
over to you.
It's funny because I wrote the next tale that I'm just going to read a little bit of. But plays into this idea of the danger of lack of attention and the consequence. And one of the ideas that I find really interesting when rewriting folk tales is sometimes where you put the point of view, where the event is witnessed by and by whom. And as I wrote this, I knew about the thresholds and the chimneys, but I love this idea of the strong door, the place where it would be safe to observe from. So Tim sees that as a character trying to get in. I see that as the watching storyteller. There's no right or wrong answer. It's just how it is. So here's the first part of why you have to watch out for your chimneys. Quite frankly, that's not actually the working title of the story. It's called Johnny He Not. So we have a farmer's wife who has a new baby that is causing her quite a bit of trouble, and her neighbour is a tailor, and he goes over because he cannot stand the racketing that's coming out of the house and feels that there's something needs to be done about it. He knocks at the door. "Don't mind our wee Johnny," Tibby said, with a voice as brittle as her smile. "These daft turns of his soon blow over." Old Woody the tailor looked at the bawling babe that was twisting against her embrace. "There's many kinds of words for the likes of him," he said, "but Johnny he not." Tibby recalled the tale she'd heard about her good neighbour, the wise tailor whose trust was as strong and tight as his stitches. "Then what name would you give him?" she asked. "Less said, soonest mended," said old Woolly as he drew up a chair close to the fire. "But I'll tell you too, there are 3 roads you can take to the reckoning of this matter. I'm in mind to start with the one most trodden." Old Woolly undid his pack and took out a bunch of hops, a bunch of barley, a fresh egg, and a silver needle. Then he turned and looked at Tibby directly. "You get yourself the other side of that strong door, girl, lock it tight, and whatever you see or hear, don't move an inch until the supper's swallowed." Tibby did as she was told. Then she pressed her cheek to the rough wood and set her eye to the keyhole. She watched as old Woolly pierced the eggshell with the needle and set his mouth to it. He sucked until his cheeks were full, then spat into the hearth. Then he cracked the blown egg clean in 2. He took water from the jug and poured it into the half that had no hole. He crushed the hops and barley between finger and thumb and placed them in the water. He set the frail flagon in the ashes of the fire and waited. There, crawling along the lip of the cradle, came a withered hand. Peeking out behind it, small squinting eyes as black as coal. Tibby crammed her apron into her mouth to stop her screaming, and she watched on. Johnny He Not pulled himself up to full standing, folded bony arms about his buckled belly, and he grinned. His smile stretched across his leathery face from the tip of one ear to the other. When he spoke, it was with a voice that tore the air. "I am old, older than old," he cried, "but never in my livelong life have I ever seen a tailor mash beer in an eggshell." Johnny He Not leapt from the cradle, grabbed the egg from the hearth and swallowed it whole. "More," he cried, "and stronger." Then he let out a great whoop and went diving back down into his blankets. Watch your chimneys, folks.
Yeah. But it's true. I mean, how do you protect your child from well, effectively a changeling? How do you protect your child? And this is, well, I suppose, in a sense, as we move on to the a bit of an interesting unpacking of a cache, in a sense. But yeah, protecting a child. I was given under trust to a cache, a very small one, a local one from the Glossop area, and here we have it. And I will show you what treasures lie within. This was taken from somewhere in the Glossop area. The person who gave it me didn't actually know where specifically. It was, somebody gave it to her, and she passed it on to me to look after, as I apparently knew what I was talking about. So we have here, nestled in the acid-free tissue paper, a child's shoe. I don't know whether you can see this or not. There's the high tech. I've turned my computer's camera down, but can you see? It's very, very small, very, very delicate. Beautiful stitching. And as you can see, it's worn. It's been worn. A child has worn this around and has walked up and down in it. You can see it's worn here and mended. Can we see the mend here? It's a beautiful object. It's old. Again, it's Victorian, I would imagine. Shoes are not one of my speciality, I have to say. But it's a child's shoe. Coupled with this were another two objects. So let's have a look. We have a child's bracelet, which is a silver metal. It's not silver as far as I can tell. It's beautiful. I can get 3 fingers through it, and that's it. So it's a young child. It's a small child. But if you look carefully, it's a horseshoe. The clasp is there. I'm not going to force it because it would likely break. But the horseshoe, again, it's a shoe, but a horseshoe is traditionally good luck, isn't it? I mean, that's a thing. Well, allegedly. And then you have, the last thing is a death notice of a chap called Richard Bacon. I don't know whether you can see that very well. There is a photograph which will show you a bit better. And you quite often find written material in caches. Sometimes, certainly at the trust, there is a right. Let's go back to where we were. Hold on. Can we get the photograph up? Perhaps is there a?
I think we're just waiting to come back.
Yeah. Here we go.
Oh no.
No.
We're just having this is the technological wonders of what we're dealing with. Just bear with us 1 second. It's just done strange thing. There we go.
Yeah, these things happen. There we go. There's a shoe. So you can see the stitching. It's such a beautiful. It's a very tactile object, but the problem is, of course, is that it's very old, and it's, as you can see, it's fraying. But it's worn. These are not new things. This is the mundanity of it all. This is rubbish, effectively, that would be thrown away.
And can we look at the whole cache as well? The shoe.
Yeah,
we've got another one coming up.
There is, isn't there? Yep, there we go. So you've got the bracelet with the horseshoe. You've got the shoe itself, and then you've got this the affectionate remembrance of Richard Bacon, and he's buried at Chinley Chapel, which is just down the road from Glossop, actually. And you find these things within caches quite often. The one at the Blackden Trust, I think, well, there are actually several caches in the old medicine house, I have to say, and one of them has this.
Yeah, let's look at the little bit of the Blackden shoes.
There we go.
Yeah,
children's shoes again. I mean, it's not surprising that this is a very real problem. Child mortality rates are absolutely sky high in the 17th and 18th, 19th, even early 20th century. So there is a need to protect the child.
And for me, I find this really interesting in terms of the characters within folk tales who have given power in the everyday. There's the blacksmith who had a little glimpse of in the bracelet, who we're going to meet later. In the Changeling tales, it's always the tailor. as far as I know. I'm a bit scared because I know there are some folklorists and storytellers listening to this, and they may well dispute that. But no, the sources that I've found, it's the tailor, and I just wonder what that's about. It's the small work, the piecing together, and I had that very much in mind. That idea of the piecing together with my retelling of the Changeling and the ending. So I'm just going to read you a little bit more of that. So the egg didn't work. Tried another thing, didn't work. And old Woolly comes back. By now, the farmer, Tibby's husband, is fully up to speed with what's going on. And old Woolly comes back for the third time. There's only one road left now, said old Woolly, and it is not a kind one. Out by the peat stack, the farmer and the tailor talked late into the night about how the worth of a child might be weighed up and measured out in fleeces and skins. At dawn, Tibby watched as the men clambered up onto the roof of the cottage and fitted the cuts of turf to the chimney, pinning it down tight, like the stitching of a coat across the broad shoulders of a gentleman. Then old Woolly gave his final instruction. Whatever you see or hear, come running when the dancing begins, he said, and not one moment after. And if you want to know the full terrible story of how Johnny Hinot was dispatched, you can go to the Unbound site link and the full tale's up there. But the end of the story, from that day on, Tibby and her husband faced the trials of life together, standing side by side in all matters. Tibby counted her blessings accordingly. Under the tailor's quiet instruction, she set a pair of pins crosswise beneath her son's pillow every night. On her husband's insistence, they always slept with a stout poker at the bedside. As for old Woolly, he left the farm that night whistling, full of plans of how he might stitch together his newfound fortunes. The next morning, his pack was discovered by the side of the road, stuffed to bursting with lambswool and strong tanned leather, but the good tailor was never seen again. So that sort of ties into the next bit that we're going to be exploring, is that these symbols of protection were very visceral and very practical. And I'm going to hand over to Tim to do some photographic unpacking for us now.
So, I hasten to add, we at the Blackden Trust don't have a complete one of these. However, we do have fragments of. And what these are Bellarmine or Bartman jugs. They are German stoneware, which is imported into England in great quantities, actually, in the 17th century, and a little bit earlier, but mainly in the 17th century. They're not particularly rare. They do crop up certainly in the Thames foreshore, but they're very characteristic. These things, big wide bellies, and they have these faces on, which allegedly it is a take on the Cardinal Bellarmine, who was quite loud in his condemnation of drinking. I don't know. It's an apocryphal tale. We obviously don't know, but they do have these faces on, and actually the face itself we will return to shortly. But the face itself seems to have been important. So these are used to make what we now know as witch bottles, which are bottles designed to, in a sense, counter a curse put against you by a witch.
Shall we take a peek inside, Tim?
Yeah, I was going to say, let's have a look inside. This has been X-rayed. I hate to say this is not my photograph. We borrowed lovingly from New Scientist, shall we say? But you can see inside what is in them. This is one of the only practices that does have contemporary literature associated with it. So we know what was in these, and it's nice to see it actually being proven with X-ray. Bent pins, you can see by the neck. There we go. These are the pins. And nails, big chunky nails. The pins are bent. They're always bent. They're never just put in. And importantly, urine. The urine of the person who has been cursed magically by a witch. And it's stoppered up. The cork is put in. and it's heated gently over a fire. The instruction is gently, but there is an account of one of these things exploding and showering the contents everywhere, which can't have been very pleasant, I have to say, but there we go. But the idea is it's almost, how shall I put this? It's almost, it's taking the bellowing jar and making it the witch's bladder. So what you're doing is you're taking it almost as a metaphor, heating it, making it very uncomfortable and filling it with pins. The idea being the witch will then stop doing the cursing, or will remove the curse upon you or your family or whatever. They're often then buried, and you do find them buried beneath hearths and between doorsteps, essentially, at the threshold between the outside and the inside.
So again, that thing with the tailor and the blacksmith and the power of metal.
Well, I mean, I've heard you say that story before, but it only suddenly occurred to me they slept with a sturdy poker. Well, that's going to be made of iron, isn't it? Yeah.
There's all sorts of variations of let's just say how the Changeling is dispatched. So shall we have so much to share, and Tim and I could keep you here till 10 at night doing this. So and we really do want to leave space for questions. So this idea of the bent object, and the idea that there is a logic to all of this. There is a system that we are working with when we interact with these elements, and that you can't really cheat that system. You have to pay your dues. And this links beautifully to our next story. And Tim's going to start with the archaeology, and then I'm going to go into the folklore version of it. So shall we look at a curious thing?
It is a halfpenny of Edward, I think. Yeah, Edward III. I did know that as well. Yeah, a halfpenny of Edward III. So it's mid 1300s, give or take. And if you look closely, I mean, it's obviously very battered. It's had an unhappy life in the ground. But if you look closely, you can see it's been bent in two and then subsequently folded out again. And what this is a really good example of what was known at the time as the English custom. Basically what it is somebody has asked a saint for their help in a problem. It may be their house is on fire, it may be their child is sick, they may be in a bit of a pickle. But what they've done is they've said to the saint, right, help me please. I'm going to take this coin and I'm going to bend it. And I will go on a pilgrimage to your shrine and deposit that coin in your name to further your honor, if you would intercede on my part and go and convince God that I am worthy to be helped. And sure enough,
we have one at Blackden, don't we, Tim?
We do. This is it. This is a slightly later one, and this is a particularly interesting one. The tradition, again, when it comes to the Reformation, it changes. You can no longer do that with saints, but the tradition of bending a coin continues. Again, shorn of its religious aspect. You are at this point you're bending coins as a memento. So you would hand that coin to somebody to say, remember me when you see this coin. Or more commonly, they are given as love tokens, so as tokens of betrothal. The idea again is that you carry it with you, and it's a constant reminder of a promise you've made, whether that's to a saint pre-Reformation or to your beloved post-Reformation. This is it's a William III. No, it's a sixpence. William III sixpence. So from about, what did I say it was? 1690 something, 1696, I think. It's very nice, very tactile.
And when I was working on the photo, in fact, I think this was the first conversation that we had, Tim, wasn't it? That this had been discovered and you were showing it to me. And I was working on a story where Jack tricks the devil, which is a folktale inversion of that. And I think I'll just go straight into the story without explaining it too much. The devil turned swiftly on his heel, faster and faster, as if dancing to a wild reel that only he could hear. Then, in the blink of an eye, there was a shifting and shrinking, and the devil was transformed into a golden coin spinning on the floorboards of the inn. he landed at Jack's feet. There, caught on the face of it, was Satan in his true form: horns, claws, hooves, wings, and tail. Jack held the devil tight in his fist and made his way over to the cooper, and in return for a flagon of ale, borrowed the use of his hammer and 2 bracket nails. In his hand, the devil kicked and clawed, and the golden coin began to bend and buckle, but Jack held on tight. Laughing at the absurdity of the instruction, the cooper hauled Jack up onto his shoulders and carried him through the cheering crowd. Jack halted him at the threshold of the doorway, the boundary, the place that was neither in nor out. His palm began to blister as the golden coin burnt with the heat of the devil's breath, but still he held on tight. Jack took the coin, the hammer, and the nails and set them to the lintel. 3 sharp strikes fixed the first bracket to the horizontal. 3 more, and the second was set across it crosswise. "Amen," cried Jack as he jumped down. The devil, caught in the coin within the cage of the crucifix, cursed, cried, and pleaded. The drinking men sobered suddenly and were sore afraid. But Jack stood firm and set the devil's eternity against his own. He would free the devil on one condition: that when Jack's time came to depart from this world, the devil would not claim him. There would be no howling hell for Jack. He would fashion his own fate. And what was really interesting about this, and Tim and I were talking about it, is there are versions. I actually slightly made up the version where he hammers the crucifix of nails. There are versions where Jack carves the cross into the coin. But for me, this was almost a sense of joining the dots of the ritual, because indeed we do have the marked coins.
Yeah, there we go. That's a cartwheel penny of George III. I've got my notes down here. It's 1797. What's interesting about this is that you can see there are 2 examples of the interlocking V form. But this is a really good one, because if you imagine, if you flip it over, invert it, you have an M and an R, Maria Regina, for the Queen of Heaven. So you can see that even within the mark itself, there's a room for movement and playing. But this is a very mundane item. They were hated, the cartwheel pennies, simply because they were so big and heavy. So, you know, it's been used, it's been spent time and again, it's worn, but the mark was made on it. And again, this is another example of a touch piece. This would have been carried by somebody. Yeah. But in having this conversation, you and I talking about this, I dug out a penny that I had. I don't know where I got it, but I did. So we go to the next photo. We see here, this is a halfpenny of George III, 1800 something or other. There is a date on it. But if you look closely, the hole right through the middle of it has been made by a handmade nail. It's a square nail. The photo doesn't really do it justice, but it's a wonderful thing. And it just reminded me the idea of nailing this coin, fixing the devil in one place.
Yeah, and there was a tradition to it. But unfortunately, you can't cheat the system. And what happens to Jack, which is, again, a folk tale motif, that he gets his bargain, but it doesn't quite work out how he thought it would. So the devil won't take him. His time comes, and he finds himself in limbo. So he goes up to heaven, and, you know, really St. Peter's having none of it. And so Jack changes his mind and goes to see the devil and says, look, you know, I was probably wrong. This limbo place that's all grey and lonely is not for me. Let's be friends. And, you know, I quite like the idea of hell. And the devil has none of it. There's a lovely phrase where he, in the folktale sources, which is, the 9 locks of hell will be forever closed against you. And then he takes a coal and he chucks it at Jack. And the force of the blow threw Jack upwards, back into the pale dead land, and the chasm below sealed shut behind him. Jack cradled the caught coal to himself for comfort. Then he saw, lying beside him, was a dried up old turnip, the withered stalk sprouting like a tuft of hair from a wrinkled brow. Jack took out his wood knife and set to work. He carved out his own double with a great grinning mouth and eyes wide with mirth and mischief. He set the glowing ember inside the hollow head, tucked it beneath his arm, and strode out across the barren land. Jack still walks that wasteland, pacing out his eternity with his coal companion. Except for one night a year where boundaries are broken, thresholds can be crossed, and out becomes in. On All Hallows Eve, Jack comes creeping, lantern in hand, into the gloomiest places of this world, the dark hearts of forests, marshes, and the moorlands. Some folks say that he's offering adventure, lighting the way to buried treasures. Others say that he means to guide us all down to purgatory alongside him for the sake of company. Only one thing is certain. If you find yourself lost and lonely in the depths of the night, and you see a light dancing at the edge of the darkness, best turn your back upon it and walk on. And what I loved about this folktale is that, you know, that's your jack-o'-lanterns. That's where it comes from. But certainly until I started researching it, I didn't know the first half. I didn't know that I knew that the versions where Jack tricks the devil in different ways. But the more I went back to root material, the more it was this thing of Jack trapping the devil in the coin. And I just find that fascinating because we can connect it to that ritual. And it really is that thing of you cannot cheat the system.
Yeah. Yeah, you have to pay the piper or fiddler in this case, I suppose. But I mean, the jack-o'-lantern, you know, as a theme, light defeating darkness. You know, he's clinging to this light as his only hope, I guess, until for each Halloween. When of course we do the same. We carve pumpkins, or traditionally in England it was, you know, mangel wurzels and Swedes. You know, it's that kind of. So it. Yeah, again, but you're also seeing, as we were talking about before with the Bartman jugs, you're seeing the human face, the human head as being an apotropaic. It is, they crop up in places. This area in particular, Glossop Dale, Longdendale, and going over towards into Yorkshire, West Yorkshire, has a long tradition of carved stone heads, or the Celtic style stone heads as they're known, although they're almost certainly all medieval or post-medieval. Yeah. But even gargoyles, you know, you see the heads on churches. They're turning away evil. They're frightening the devil itself.
Fascinating. Okay, so we are taking a little turn on our long roads, and I'm now going to move on to, I think, probably my favourite story from when I was a child, which is the Black Bull of Norway. And this lovely illustration is from the Joseph Jacobs English Fairy Tales collection. It's the J.D. Batten. And I think we can all understand why I identified so much with this. I love the sense of energy of this story, that the premise of it is that she is the youngest of three sisters, and they all sit on their doorstep waiting for their fate to come and claim them. The eldest one is taken off in a golden carriage. The middle sister has a silver carriage. Third sister, great big black bull. And off they go on various adventures full of ritual and strangeness. And it's a complex, beautiful story that goes through many landscapes. And it's essentially a love trial. And there is a point where something terrible happens and the black bull's bride is parted from her husband, and she finds herself suddenly in this strange land, this strange uncertain land of ice. And this is what happens. She walked until the shoes upon her feet were rent to ribbons. Then she found she could go no further. The air ahead turned suddenly solid. A wall of glass reared up before her, keeping her from whatever lay beyond it, or keeping something in. There, staring out from the heart of the shining barricade, was a tangled-haired, wild-eyed, tatter-clad girl. The black bull's bride reached out her hand. The stranger echoed her. In that moment, she understood. It was not only her husband who had been so savagely transformed by fate. The Black Bull's bride walked the run of the wall. The smooth escarpment gave way to crevice and crag, and as her unfamiliar self bent and buckled at her side, she saw that this brutal boundary was not a thing crafted by man. It was a mountain of glass that stretched beyond sight and thought, and there was no way round, over, or through. Then, across the shoulder of the girl she had become, she saw a flickering light, a fire. A sound came echoing down the air, like the beating of the division bell, iron upon iron. The Black Bull's bride ran as fast as bloodied feet on ice shingle could carry her to the threshold of that forge. The blacksmith set down his tools and listened as she told the tale of her beastly-bodied, noble-hearted husband, and how all that she loved was now lost to her for eternity. Eternity is evermore in some worlds, said the blacksmith, and in others it is not. He stirred the coals and the flames leapt. In the place where ice and fire meet, nothing is forever fixed. The blacksmith set out his bargain. He would give shelter and lodging in return for an apprenticeship served, and they would see what they might see at the end of it. And again, Tim, that's the power of iron, isn't it?
Absolutely. Long held true to be against evil. It is used to repel evil and to destroy evil. Think of the pins in the Bellarmine jars. Horseshoes, as we mentioned, and the poker. It's interesting. I've always found this interesting, the concept of blacksmith as magician, and I think this is where this idea of iron being a good defense against evil comes from. In many cultures, these transformative skills, so clay into pottery and stone into iron, it's very dangerous spiritually. And there's all sorts of taboos around it. There's food you can and can't eat before you smelt. There's restrictions on women being around it or men being around the potters. It's a really fascinating area.
That's what I find so interesting about this story, that there is it is the heroine that's allowed into this world. And just because I don't want to keep us all out on the long roads for too long, I'll move on quite quickly now to the interpretation of this particular object.
Yeah.
So I'll do the reading first, and then Tim can explain to you what it is.
Try and explain.
But all I will say is that for me as a child, this was always the truth of this part of the story, and this object that we're looking at now was always the result. For 7 long years, she worked without complaint. She turned her own mother's washerwoman tasks, hauling water, fetching fuel, sweeping and scrubbing to a man's purpose. She set herself to the bellows and learned the art of breath building that tempered flame. She learned the piecework, mastering the mechanisms of bolts and brackets that fixed the strong doors of kitchen and stable. She learned the loosening and the fitting of every shape and size of shackle, from the fence links as fat as her fist to the fingertip filigree of bridle bits. And as she wove chain to rein, she thought of her 2 sisters and their unseen suitors, and prayed that their roads from cottage door to marriage bed had been kind. She learned the drawing out and the twisting of weapons. She hammered out spear, shield, and the 9-folded sword, and cast them into the blanching basin. Then, as the 7th year rolled round, she set to the making of her own metal. She fashioned soul, heel, toe, and tongue, and married them together into her apprentice piece. The air chimed anew as her iron shoes met glass mountain. And
yes,
here we have a shoe unlike any other, Tim.
What we see on your screen right now is it's a 16th century side saddle stirrup, a slipper stirrup, designed for use by a lady to preserve her modesty. There we go. I don't know, you know how side saddles work. I actually had to research this because I have no idea. I am not a horse rider by any means, but yeah, the idea is that this would have been attached to a regular stirrup via a leather strap, and that strap would have been attached to the pommel on the side of the horse, which you then put your leg around, and your foot would go into this slipper, and the other bit would be dangling down, and that's where you put your weight whilst you're riding. It can't be very comfortable riding side saddle, I have to say, but it's a beautiful, beautiful object. It's absolutely exquisitely made. It's very, very well made, but it's not so well made that you wouldn't use it. So I suspect this has seen a lot of use. The fact that it's got these hearts in it, which you can see on the side and at the top, suggests maybe with a sort of romantic bent that maybe it's a love token, maybe it's a marriage gift from a lord to a lady, or I don't know, but it's a wonderful thing, and I wish I knew more about it. I have to say.
But it was yes, it was something that I'd always known about as one, and it's hidden away in something that we showed you earlier. So we'll just return to it for a moment, which it was there in the cache list. So this was found at Blackden.
So it's number C132 at the bottom. It's a side saddle stirrup. It is. It was placed in the cache. So it's difficult to date this cache, but it's probably going to be 150 years after that thing was made, give or take. So it's been around for a while, and I wonder if it was an heirloom or something similar, that rather than something that somebody had found, I get the impression that it was something important before it being deposited. And of course, it harks back to shoes again. Shoes being very important, simply because, and there's a question that people will be yelling at home, why shoes? Why shoes? But it's the best guess is that it's a shoe retains the shape of its wearer. It's something you wear continually until it wears out and you throw it away. And in that time, it becomes almost a part of you. It retains your scent, it retains the shape of your foot, and it's a very personal object. As I'm sure anybody who's worn someone else's shoes will know that it feels very strange to do that. So
yeah, it's very hard to walk in someone else's shoes, isn't it?
Yeah.
Sorry, go.
No, go. We should move on. I say we could do this all night, couldn't we? So
we really could, and we want to do space questions. So I think we're now going to we're coming back to the outside boundary. We're going to return to that old riddle that tripped Jack up. Where does north, south, east, and west meet? And you found it.
We did. This is Wormstones in Glossop. It's sort of overlooking. Glossop is just to the left of these stones. It's a stunning place, and I must have been up there dozens of times, because it's a fair walk, but it's nothing too strenuous. You can do it quite easily. And the last time I was there, taking my daily walk during lockdown, and I'd never noticed this before, but I stood on an outcrop, and it's quite a drop from this point straight down. It just appeared to me. It took a while to work out what it was, but it's the cardinal point of a compass and all the points in between. It's a wonderful carving. I don't think it's old. I think it's probably newer than Victorian, if I'm honest. But it's a wonderful thing to come across.
I just think it's beautiful that was that reaction to place. Again, shall we see how Jack got out of his situation at the crossroads?
Yes.
So I'm going to read, and then I'm just going to talk a little bit about the drawing out of this story and working with the source material. So Jack could feel the ground beneath his feet opening up as the gentleman played his tune faster and faster. Jack shut his eyes and sharpened his wits. He thought of all the tales of the long roads, the tales of this world and of the hidden places above and below it. Jack took his thoughts and he set them to the gentleman's tune. Heaven is taller than the tree, and hell is deeper than the sea. The hunger of a jealous mind pricks sharper than the thorn so fine. The shame of the beloved's scorn cries louder than the hunter's horn. The envy that stews deep in the blood one's greener than the field or wood. The flattery that does honest truth surpass is smoother than the shining glass. Colder than the clay of any land, is the touch of death's sure hand. But love is longer, in both the finding and the keeping, than any winding way of fortune seeking. Dreadful though the witch's words may be, the devil is worse, and you, fine sir, are none but he. The fiddle stilled its tune. Jack gathered all his courage and looked directly at the gentleman as he sang out his final verse. Your riddles thus solved, the wager is won. With your true name I command thee, devil, be gone. 2 handsome horns came twisting out of the sides of that stovepipe hat. Hands and feet became claws and hooves. There was a terrible tearing as the long coat was rent asunder by steel-scaled wings sprouting from a buckled back, and a tufted tail unravelled beneath. Savage Satan let out a great roar, which shook both land and sky as he departed in a flash of fire. And what I love about that is that idea of the true naming, and that's there in all the sources in the versions of the riddle. That if you look at it directly, name it directly, it's that defeats the devil. But I'm just going to give a little peek inside my notebook now. So when I was working with this material, the solutions to the riddles are very simple in the original verse, and it is as simple as the hunger is sharper than the thorn. The shame is louder than the horn. And I just wanted, it took me ages to write that expansion of it. But I was really interested in this idea of actually what it is about that metaphorical element that connects that object with that part of human character. And so you can see sort of my working out there. And it's interesting because the one that were the variation, I forgot death on that list initially because I probably just didn't want to think about it. But so the spite is sometimes interchangeable with envy. And I like the idea that, spite, the answer, the question for that is what is sharper than the axe? It's spite. But when I came to kind of distill it down into the 9 questions, that was the one that disappeared. And really what I was doing there was looking at how objects and abstract fit together. And it's this kind of collaboration really that's at the heart of the Blackden Trust. And it's also at the heart of the work that I'm doing in Lost and Found with the wonderful illustrator Phoebe Connolly. And one of those lovely little moments of coincidence was she did her degree show before we met, before I was really working on the folk tales. And as we were talking about collaboration, she sent me a picture of this. So what we have here is from her degree show. She's a silversmith and engraver as well as an illustrator and a wood engraver, because, why not? And what I love about this in the context of these ritual objects, these were all found objects that she collected and then decorated and transformed them. I love the sense of the metal that possibly would be inside. And this is my interpretation. This is not what Phoebe, and I don't know whether it's what Phoebe intended. I'll have to ask her. But if we think back to those pins hidden in the bottle, what we have is this one on the right-hand side is the metal coming out of the surface of the bottle. Mm. And a very beautiful thing.
It is a beautiful thing. As I say, I look at that and I go, that's a hand-blown bottle. It's probably mid-Victorian blown into a mould. But again, we operate on different levels, don't we?
Well, we coexist. And I think, the thing to take that I've loved about doing this work together, these conversations, is this idea that the objects and the stories, they're not separate from each other. Mm. The characters travelled on the log roads together, and the objects and their intentions interweave. And this was something I was really trying to get across. So this is a little bit of fine-tuning of when I was working out that idea of connecting the long road to the love and the finding and the keeping. And I think this is what I find absolutely fascinating, is that in folk tales, we have these long-standing motifs but I really think they were always about human experience. So I'm going to take us back to the outside of the crossroads, and I'm just going to end with a reading from my solution of the riddles of the crossroads, because in the originals, that's it. Jack names the devil goes away, Jack's fine. And this goes back to my idea of what makes Jack Jack, because he is someone who acts in the moment, the trickster, the curious character. And I thought about this a lot, and it took me quite a while to go into it. And I found myself going back to the riddle and thinking of that as character. So the devil's gone, and Jack scuffed away the circle that had held him. Then and there he found he would not fall foul of the self-made snares of jealousy, shame, flattery, or envy. Nor would he risk the trading of his own heart for that of another. Neither would he set his gaze upon a far horizon and dream away his days until death laid its hand upon his shoulder. Instead, Jack pledged that he would set his mind only to whatever unfolded directly before him. Step by sure and steady step, he would be the constant master of his own fate. Then he took a penny from his pocket, set it spinning beside the signpost, and the road that it fell upon was the road that he took. Over to you, Tim.
Not sure how you to follow that, actually. A soft shoe shuffle, perhaps. I don't know.
I think it's that time.
Yeah. I mean, I just think, what struck me looking at your list of the answers is the metaphor used. So the thorn is sharper, and the mundane aspect of those objects, and yet what they stand for and the greater thing. And I think if from the caches and from the marks, it's something that it resonates, that it is the mundane that matters. For me, it's not what we look at them, it's a shoe, but it's what happened whilst that shoe was being worn. And I think as an archaeologist, it's the stories that are untold and unknowable that are really interest. And the transformation of the mundane into something that's extremely important.
Yeah. And I think that it's interesting, isn't it? Because that's what riddles are, and that call and response. It's the what is hidden in the thing, and actually the interaction with the riddle is ritual in itself. It's linguistic ritual.
There is almost a litany to it. The call and response. It is liturgical. And
you can change the mundane into the abstract by the way that you look at it. And actually, I'm just thinking aloud now, but I think that's so fascinating about that. And if you think of a riddle in terms of that, it is the impossible question, but if you look at the heart of it, you can solve it.
Yeah.
The test is a test of looking, in a way.
Yeah.
And on that note, I'm going to open it up. But before I do, I'm just going to end with another lovely, our final folk motif, which is, in these stories, is always often characters go out into these other lands and have their adventures, and maybe they don't come back. But if they do come back and they return home changed. And there's often the sense that time passes completely differently in the liminal places. No more so than in this liminal place of Zoom that we've been on, but it's both on the inside of the chimney and on the outside. And thank you very much, everyone. We'll take some questions.
Yes, yeah.
Already.
Thank you. That was so fascinating. What's really lovely is I'm sat at home here in Macclesfield, but I feel like I've been on a real journey and I've kind of really gone places, which is just lovely. And we have had some questions come through, so I will crack on with some of those. So I've got a question about the burning on the beams of the houses, and whether we think that was all done in one go, or is this something that would have been done over a longer period? Did they sit there burning and scratching for a while, or did they go back to it every now and again?
I don't know. is the honest answer. My feeling is that it will be returned to time and again, almost a renewing of the mark being made, perhaps. But it's very different. There is no easy way of trying to find that out either. I think that would require a lot of. But that's my instinct, at least, is that yes, it would be something that would be done, maybe even on a particular time of year.
Well, we had this lovely thing. Gosh, Tim, I can't remember if we haven't told you this. This is a total admission on my part. But before lockdown, a couple of friends of mine came up for the weekend that hadn't been to the Mundane house before, and my mother was doing the tour, and just a formal tour, and explaining stuff. And one of my friends, Laurent, had memory. He grew up in the Basque country, of his, as a child, seeing his mother doing a ritual with a candle at windows, and he was told that he shouldn't. This was a woman's business, and that he shouldn't have followed her, but because he had, and because he was curious, he could watch. And it was. He says he can't remember what date it was, but it was a ritual that, and she didn't know why she did it, but her mother had done it, her grandmother had done it, so you do it.
There is on Crete a very similar Easter ritual. You take the light from the one light within the church, and you take your candle home. And it is traditional to use the flame, the smoke from the flame, to make a cross above your doorway. It's a similar idea. It's the very specific. It's Easter, but it's taking the candle flame from the church, your local church, and you take it to your house to light your own candle. And obviously, it's the metaphor of the light spreading into the world. There we go. But we digress.
Another couple of questions, if that's okay. Are the majority of apotropaic marks and caches post-Reformation?
Yes. That, however, as it stands, as I say, it's a field that is being explored currently. There are examples of perhaps what we would term deposits in the medieval period, but they are genuinely, the vast majority that are leaping to mind are post-Reformation, which in a sense makes them, which actually, I'm not going to go too far into this because I really will talk all night, but I think it is the Reformation that causes these things to be relied upon a lot more.
Okay. Someone has just posted, talking of Basque, I am told that the Basque word for axe is the same as for stone.
Oh,
apparently.
That's interesting.
Does the transformative aspect, clay to pot and stone to iron, have some connection to alchemy and alchemical processes?
Yes, I mean, I think rather it's almost putting the tail wagging the dog there, but I think the alchemy is very much a transformative of a spiritual kind as well as a physical kind, and I think they are mining the same seam. They are exploring the same aspect of humanity. I could probably give a better answer, but I think they are mining the same aspect of being human.
So a little bit of self-promotion for you here, Tim. Where besides Twitter can I find Dr. Green's work?
Well, good question. The Blackden Trust. Any emails that go there, I will try and deal with to the best of my ability. You can come and see me. I do give tours occasionally when we're allowed to, obviously. But I do have a blog. So if you search for Glossop Cabinet of Curiosities, I post randomly there, so you can get in contact with me there as well if you want. It's a lot more local, my blog. It's nothing bigger, although I do touch on a lot of these themes because they're interests of mine.
So somebody's asked about how recently the double V's appear in houses or on coins. I suppose we kind of almost covered that a little bit earlier on, but
yeah, well, that's a good question. They're certainly there until the early part of the 19th century. So early 1800s, you find them on houses. The railway line was put in here about 1840 something, and there are examples on the railway line. Now they may be strictly mason's marks, but it shows a continuation of the symbol. And I don't know of any later examples, but I can certainly I can have a look. But it wouldn't surprise me, as a very simply carved mark, it would, I'm sure, almost certainly continue to present day, perhaps. I don't know.
I didn't know that about the railway lines, Tim, but with my folklore head brain on, it's almost like that almost feels like a remembered ritual, but also just in case. It's like, is it all right building this thing here and making us go faster than we ought to possibly be going, and bringing the outside in and all of that? Maybe just in case.
Yeah.
The other aspect of that is quite possibly the continuation of Roman Catholic belief, in that a lot of the navvies working on the railway line would have been Irish themselves, who would be practicing Catholics. So there's potentially an element of that as well, but it's part of this bigger subject that is, as I say, is currently being explored by many different people, because it is so interesting.
I had a question, if that's okay.
Yeah, of course.
I just wondered, thinking about the folk tales, whether they're stories that are to help kind of forewarn people. It's about, there's a potential something that could go wrong here, or it's telling people don't go to a particular place or don't do a particular thing. Are they forewarnings? Is this a kind of way of forewarning people?
I think forewarning is possibly a more modern way of looking at it. The way I like to think about it is that they're tools for living. These are really old stories and really old motifs that are have survived because they're important. And although in the collection it's British and a couple of European and a couple of Russian folklore, because this is what I grew up with and what thrived on. But you can see these motifs repeating, and I don't think they're necessarily saying don't, because actually some of the most interesting stories develop from the don'ts. And this is certainly a storyteller, wonderful storyteller friend of mine, Daniel Morden, did a whole show about this. That what happens, the don't open the door, don't look inside the bag, don't open the box. Well, if you agreed to the don'ts, there would be no story. So I think the phrase tools for living makes more, because and this is why I'm so interested in developing character as well. You can't go through those experiences and not be changed. So what do those changes teach you, and how do they teach us to live? Yeah,
because Jack's story is interesting because of his curiosity, isn't it? And and we go there because of his curiosity.
Yes. Yeah. And Jack pushes the boundaries, and there's another story in there another Jack story where he's definitely the agency of like, he's quite often a mirror to human nature. His trickster stuff is showing the hypocrisy or the gap between the public role and the private self and all of that. So yes, I think they're very complex, and it would be easy to read them. And in some retellings, they are distilled into these kind of moral fables. But I think there's much more in the bedrock than that.
We have someone's asking specifically, when is Lost and Found being published?
We are in development. It's been fully funded, which is an absolute joy. And Phoebe is currently working on the illustrations. So the way these things work, I think we're going to have to be waiting for it for a little while. I think it's looking like it's going to be spring 2022, which is a really lovely thing for me personally, because actually, just as it was 50 years ago this year that the old Medicine House was deconstructed, it was finished. It would be 2022. It'll be the anniversary of its completion, and we're really hoping to put together quite a special sequence of events at the Trust there. So for me, there's a lovely circularity. You know, some of these stories I first had told in that chimney. I read the books from my parents' library in that chimney. So the thought of being able to possibly celebrate the not possibly, because my goodness, we'll be out of these virtual woods by then. Being able to those things to match together is really rather lovely. So yes, we're with spring 2022.
That's brilliant. Well, I think we'll probably have to kind of round up there for the evening. We have overrun a little bit, but it's just been so special to hear that. And I think that, you know, to sort of end on that note, really, of looking forward to 2022, when we can all gather again face to face. But this has been brilliant, you know, and I think it's been fascinating. And we've hosted, you know, a lot of people have joined us this evening, so that's been really special. So thank you ever so much for this evening.
Can I just add thanks for me and Tim as well, because
there
are so many people that have enabled us to bring this together. You know, the Maclit for sponsors, the Hamilton Project for inviting us, Mandy Martinez, who's just been such a huge supporter of the creative work of the Trust, yourself for guiding us through, our tech superstars of Al and Liam, who've been steering the ship and enabling me and Tim just to feel like we are at the either end of each other's kitchen table. I must give a special mention to David Heek, who took the beautiful photographs of inside the medicine house. He's helped us at the Trust for so long, and that they really capture the mood of it. And last but not least, this is where I always get emotional when I do this. It's ridiculous. I always feel this is a very important acknowledgement to make, and I always get emotional about it. But to my parents, it's ridiculous. Stop it. Because I grew up with this sense of this house being moved. It was a remarkable thing to do. And it's only now, you know, 50 years later, that I see how remarkable it was, but also incredibly remarkable that they have now decided to open the doors, created the Trust, and made all these private treasures public. So we wouldn't be able to do this if not for that.
Yeah,
that is super special, and I think it will be wonderful, and we'd love for you to come back to Lit again, and for us to explore more. I just think would be absolutely wonderful. So thank you ever so much, Liz and Tim, for a really, really special evening. That's just been brilliant.
Great, thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Yes, thank you, everybody, for tuning in.
Yes.
Bye.